Hi, I'm Nervous, and I just finished reading the fourth installment of the Tales from the Pizzaplex series, Submechanophobia. If you're new to the channel, it is my current mission to overanalyze every story from this series, and today we'll be looking into the title story, Submechanophobia, and Animatronic Apocalypse. Since Bobby Dots is in two parts, we'll cover that story fully in another video. I'll also be doing one big review of the epilogues at the end. If you're not new here, you know I don't always review the stories in the order they show up in the book, and today is no exception. We'll be doing them in the reverse order. And if you know me at all, you'll be able to guess exactly why I'm going to talk about our title story last. As always when I talk about the books, if you don't need the summary, skip it. Like the video if you find yourself enjoying it, and subscribe to become a part of the Nervous system. And without further ado, let's get analyzing. Robbie is a sixth grader who enjoys playing a Dungeons & Dragons style role-play game called Animatronic Apocalypse with his school's Fazbear fan club. The group invented the game themselves, and it involves the students trying to survive being attacked by animatronics at their school and the surrounding areas. Robbie leaves early one day to hang out with his friend Dyson, and on that same day, the school principal, Mr. Renner, announces the club president has to move away, and they'll be voting on a new one. Mr. Renner was filling in that day as the club chaperone while the usual one was at the doctor's. However, he continues as the chaperone even when the other teacher returns. The club votes a girl named Sabrina, a new student, as their new president, and she immediately implements a number of changes in the club which concern Robbie. She insists everyone copy their homework from each other and not talk about club activities outside of the club. Sabrina speaks about the animatronic apocalypse as if it is really going to happen, and the other club members are listening intently. Robbie mentions that at one point, Sabrina doesn't quite look like herself. As days go by, Robbie feels the other members of the club are acting strangely. Someone has graffitied a school wall talking about the animatronic apocalypse, and Sabrina can regularly be found having private conversations with the principal. She also becomes increasingly hostile towards Robbie. Mr. Renner later announces his Faculty Preparedness Initiative, a proposal to move funds around to help the school prepare for the animatronic apocalypse, and he's going to have the students vote on it. Robbie and his friend Dyson seem to be the only two who think it's suspicious, and Robbie decides to tell his dad, who is skeptical that anything is wrong but says he'll call the school to look into it. Mr. Renner is fired for his behavior, though this doesn't stop the strange behavior of the students and even adults as they continue to talk about the apocalypse as a real event. Robbie sees them doing strange things like eating dirt and beetles, being told that these things will protect them from toxins from the animatronics. Robbie catches his own dad eating a beetle, and one of the kids tells him they had to poke needles under their nails. Things escalate when Robbie finds the club members buried in the ground in a forest with only their heads exposed. He digs up one of the children, and Sabrina screams at him to leave. They go to the police station to explain what happened, but the kid he dug up seems unable to recall. And when they go with the officer to investigate, none of the kids are there, though there are traces of them. Robbie and Dyson are talking about what to do about things and get into an argument right before Robbie realizes Dyson has eaten a beetle too. Robbie decides to break into Mr. Renner's house to investigate, but when he arrives, he realizes the entire club is there and they ambush him. And Mr. Renner is wearing a Freddy Fazbear mask. Sabrina and Mr. Renner exclaim that Robbie is an animatronic and must be taught a lesson. The group attacks Robbie, including Mr. Renner. Robbie reaches for a fire poker and stabs Mr. Renner, who begins twitching and spewing black liquid. The other children leave, Sabrina calling him a loser before walking out. Feeling afraid he may have seriously hurt the principal, Robbie goes looking for him, but is attacked again. This time, he stabs Mr. Renner multiple times and once in the eye, and it is enough that he falls to the floor and black liquid collects in his mouth and bubbles out. However, when police arrive on the scene, they say Mr. Renner's body is not inside, and the only thing they found was a pool of black liquid identified as motor oil. Sabrina transfers schools and isn't seen again, nor is Mr. Renner ever found. The town seems to return to normal, though Robbie is fearful that Mr. Renner will return to hurt him. He and some of his friends restart the Fazbear fan club, but this time they want to focus on helping the community by doing volunteer work. This is another example of a Tales story I completely misunderstood before reading it myself based off of other people's summaries. It's also one I'm sure people don't talk about just because it seems a bit odd. The whole eating bugs and dirt to protect yourself from the animatronics, it's hard to make sense of, and how bizarre is it that the children bury themselves Twisted One style? But putting those things aside, the story beats here very well mirror the events leading up to and even somewhat through Security Breach in a way. Mr. Renner standing in for Glitch Trap or the Mimic and Mimic programs, however you want to define those things, and Sabrina standing in for VANESSA, or even a combination of VANESSA and Gregory. It's even worth mentioning that this story came out almost a year after Security Breach and is the book directly preceding the GGY story. It's also very clear from this story that if it is meant to be a parallel, the influence of Glitch Trap is able to reach beyond the Pizzaplex and into the community, but it also lets us know that it can be avoided. Robbie just so happened to not be at the school when Mr. Renner took hold over the Fazbear fan club. And despite members attempting to force him to eat a beetle, he resists and remains unaffected by whatever brainwashing or mind control is going on at the school, with parents, and even with police officers, as one of them changes his tune with Robbie when he mentions the animatronic apocalypse. And one question I had while examining this story was, why beetles specifically? And while beetle symbolism covers a wide variety of topics from good fortune to strength and perseverance, one thing that kept coming up, which I found interesting, was regeneration. Egyptians saw the scarab beetle as a symbol of rebirth, the cycle of life and death, and even resurrection. This, of course, leads naturally to William Afton and his ultimate desire to achieve immortality. While looking into this, I was even reminded by this Reddit post of VANESSA mentioning seeing a beetle in an ink blot test, adding one more connection between Sabrina and VANESSA.
Then I'm going to show you some ink blots, like this one. And I want you to tell me the first thing it makes you think of. Here we go. What do you see here?
A treehouse.
It does look sort of like a treehouse, doesn't it? Do you like treehouses?
I like to sit outside and read.
That's good. Now, what about this one?
A beetle.
Really? Looks like a face to me.
Now, we know Glitch Trap is capable of having influence over human behavior, and we knew this before this story came out, so I'm not suggesting that this story revealed anything to us, but I do appreciate the idea that this influence doesn't have to be one person at a time. Potentially, Glitch Trap or the Mimic Virus has the ability to influence an entire room of people the way it seemed Mr. Renner and Sabrina were able to in the classroom. It could add a new layer to that all-staff meeting from the Security Breach duffel bag messages. And since Robbie is unaffected because he missed the meeting, I wonder if a staff member at the Pizzaplex missed their meeting. Just some thoughts to leave you with as we move on to the second half of today's video. Okay, I think that's a good overview of my reading and interpretations of Animatronic Apocalypse. Now let's move on to Submechanophobia. Caden is a mechanic at Freddy's Fantasy Water Park, an old park that had been closed for years and only reopened after the Mega Pizzaplex opened up a couple towns over. He desperately needs the job to help take care of his grandma who has Alzheimer's, but the job is difficult for him due to his submechanophobia, a fear of submerged, man-made objects. And his job is to repair machines in the mech aquarium. where all of the animatronics are underwater. His phobia comes from the bizarre event of his parents being lost at sea when he was in first grade, combined with him getting scared by a giant whale animatronic on a field trip in second grade. This condition causes him to have hallucinations of the animatronics trying to attack him while he works on them. Though one day, as he's swimming to the surface, Zeus, the sea dragon animatronic, comes toward Caden, mouth open, even though the power was off, and he shouldn't have been able to move. He fought through his fear to investigate Zeus, finding a child's white shoe inside of the animatronic's mouth that looked like it had been there for a while. He went home, unsure of how to proceed, and had a nightmare about his second grade field trip incident. When he goes back to work, Caden decides to tell his coworker Roy about the shoe. Roy wears many hats at the water park, serving as its janitor, food vendor, game runner, and nighttime security guard. He loved the park as a child and is very dedicated to it now. Although he is shocked to hear about the shoe Caden found, and doesn't know how it could have gotten inside an animatronic's mouth. Roy tells Martin, the owner of the park, who is upset with Caden for not telling him about the shoe. Roy then tells Martin, the owner of the park, about the incident, who is now upset with Caden for not telling him. Caden says he threw the shoe away to make Martin believe he wasn't suspicious about it, and promises to tell him first thing in the future. When Caden asks him about the animatronics moving when the power was off, Martin tells him he's imagining things. The next time Caden is diving to make repairs, he feels the animatronics are staring at him. He finds a strange rock before realizing his oxygen tank is empty, which confuses him as he knows he filled it the day before. After work, he goes to visit his grandma, who feels like she remembers something bad happening at the park, but her Alzheimer's prevents her from being able to focus on the issue for long enough to actually remember what happened. Later, he realizes the rock he found was actually a piece of a bone. And that night, he has another nightmare, one where kids are being eaten by the animatronics at the mech aquarium while Martin and Roy watch. Caden is able to find a newspaper story in his grandma's things about a child named Jason who went missing after visiting the park many years ago. And he was wearing white shoes, just like the one Caden found. The next day in the park's workshop, the power went out in the shop, and a large shelf fell, nearly crushing Caden. Martin warns him that if he doesn't start acting more safely around the park, he's going to have to fire Caden, who says that he thinks he saw somebody else in the shop with him who may have turned the power off. Roy then tells Caden to be honest with Martin, that he didn't see anyone in the workshop with him, and he decides he could have just been seeing things, but something felt wrong. Before he feels ready to go to the police with his evidence, he sneaks into the park at night to dive in one last time and look for more. He finds a human skull, but as he tries to swim out of the water with it, the diver animatronic, Frank, begins swimming after him and tries to strangle him. Caden wrestles Frank's diving helmet off to reveal it's actually Martin. And once his identity is revealed, all of the animatronics in the water head toward Martin and drown him to death. The park closes when Caden tells police what happened and shows them what he found. The remains are identified as Jason's, and he is heralded as a town hero for solving the mystery of the missing child. As Caden begins to leave the water park for the last time, he finds out Roy has decided to buy the place and rename it to Roy's Fantasy Water Park, promising to fix it up to look like it did when he was younger, including bringing back the original Freddy and gang animatronics. Look, I'm not even gonna bury the lead here because frankly, this is an otherwise pretty straightforward story, right? But if you'd like to, pause the video here and write a comment guessing what I'm going to say about this story's main character. All done? Perfect. Caden is a young man who experienced a tragic loss at a young age that haunted him growing up, going so far as to have nightmares and hallucinations. As he works at a Freddy's location, a job he couldn't turn down, he uncovers a gruesome truth. The man he works for is a child killer, and the animatronics he works with are haunted. They don't trust him because he's an employee, and they may even mistake him for their captor. But in truth, their killer dons a suit of an animatronic to blend in with them. And only when his identity is revealed do they turn on him. Our main character risks his life to achieve some kind of justice and seems to succeed, only for some other eager soul to come along and try to revive something that should have stayed a memory. That's right, Kaidan is a Michael parallel. I also think it's important to note that the second nightmare that Kaidan has reminds me a lot of the way it seems like the spirits in the original FNAF games kind of may have been communicating with Michael in those early games. I don't know how to articulate this very well, but I think it's very clear that the second nightmare that Kaidan has seems to be like the spirits kind of trying to influence his dreams and kind of give him an idea of what happened to them, that they were like fed to these animatronics, that something of that nature happened at the water park. And it reminds me of the way that Michael gets these hallucinations and these sorts of flashes of memory. I don't like, definitely in the movie where he has these memories and he's able to talk to the spirits. I know it doesn't work as strictly like that in the games, but we see him have these hallucinations and things like that to me seem to be the spirits attempting to communicate with him. I'm sorry I can't articulate that better, but like that's a point that I feel like is important to express, and I just wanted to say it. Okay. I genuinely didn't think I was going to like this story much at all while I was reading it, but after reflecting on it, I really enjoyed the way it felt more like a mystery unfolding rather than a straightforward horror story, though I can understand how it would be a slow read. But I like Kaidan as a protagonist because he reminds me more of Movie Mike or Silver Eyes Charlie, and I didn't mind the story's pacing once I understood the kind of story I was reading. And on that note regarding our protagonist, the story plays out more similarly to the way the movie and the Silver Eyes novels do, where the costumed killer is revealed to his victims who believed he was one of them. So then the question we're left with is, why tell this story? In my opinion, it's really as simple as showing us the nature of the Fazbear brand. Just one more reminder that even though Kaidan was able to get the water park closed, Roy came along to start it right back up in spite of the numerous tragedies that had taken place there. And for all intents and purposes, Roy seems to have good intentions, but sometimes that's just not enough. And some of Roy's actions in the story strike me as odd and untrustworthy. He almost seemed to know more about Martin and the park's sordid past than he let on. Roy claimed to be obsessed with the park and claimed to know the kid who went missing, but never mentioned that Jason had been at the park the same day he disappeared. He also gets suspicious of Kaidan asking him about it. He's the one who tells Martin about the shoe Kaidan found, and even seems a bit threatening after the incident with the shelf in the park's workshop. He's a suspicious character who, while he does seem to have a lot of care for the park, I don't know, his intentions just feel a bit off. There's just something about him that makes me uncomfortable. And when we consider how in the very next installment of the series we're introduced to Mr. Burrows, the current board chairman of Fazbear Entertainment, who definitely cares about the success of the company, but tends to, we'll say, ignore red flags, we see a common thread in the kind of people who are interested in revitalizing the brand. I'm gonna shift the camera so that you can see Toast, because I know it's so annoying that she's like right on the edge of the screen. There she is. Now you can see her a little better. I could even see a thread between Kaidan and Edwin both being on the more technical and skeptical side of things, while Mr. Burrows and Roy are the more zealous kind of businessmen. The story ends with Roy asking if Kaidan will come back and work for him, though we never hear Kaidan's reply. I can only imagine if he did take the job, it would be to try to make the park a safer place, while Roy would be focused on progress at any cost. With all that being said, I pass these questions off to you. What do you think about these stories? If you are a Tales Games believer, do you believe a water park exists in the game world, or do only some of the stories take place in the timeline? And do you agree with me that a better name for the mech aquarium would be Mechanaquarium? Because that's what I kept saying in my head while I was reading it. I absolutely love finding the potential narrative parallels in these books, and even if I'm totally overthinking it, it's such a great way to immerse myself in the world of FNAF. I hope you'll join me next time when we discuss the Bobby Dots. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. And if you're new here, consider subscribing to become a part of the nervous system and turn on bell notifications to theoretically be notified when I upload or go live. I put out new videos every week and stream on Wednesdays and Fridays, but if you can't wait, there are videos on the screen right now just for you. Okay, bye! But her Alzheimer's prevents her from being able to focus